Qualcast Nation, we are bringing a friend back to the show. I am so excited. We initially met in Denver. Then I made an appearance on her podcast, which I'm going to just stay straight out of the gates. It was ballin'. It was a fun experience. But Mikki is got so much to bring to the table. And for the record, before I forget to say this, your interview style is glorious. Your tone, your rhythm. As a person that does interviews, you can't help not to notice when someone brings it. But Mikki is a full package here. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Quadro. And I have to say, of course, as a podcast host, you'll know this as well. It all depends on the guests too, right? And it was such an easy conversation with you because you were super interesting. And I feel really honored that you've asked me to come on your podcast. So thank you so much.
Of course, absolutely. And there's so much to cover, but I really want to hear a bit of your story. What got you into the world of nutrition? And we don't see too many PhD registered nutritionists, so I'm really curious to hear your background.
Yeah, thank you. So I wonder if a lot of nutritionists have the same sort of start as I did. Like, I was a chubby teenager. My mum was overweight, so she didn't put me on a diet. I wanted to join her in these diets that she was doing. You know, it was a bit of bonding for us, if you like. And so I think very early on, I probably developed a bit of, for want of a better word, probably obsession. You know, like a lot of people, I feel, in our profession actually almost sort of come from, and I don't mean that in a super sort of disparaging way, but it's just an observation. And I was very much in it too. And so I guess I developed an interest in nutrition and physical education at the same time. Actually, I had a basketball coach. I was terrible at basketball, and he told me as much. And in my sort of in between my sort of freshman and sophomore year at high school, I thought I'm gonna show him. I'm gonna get really fit, and I'm going to be really good at basketball. And this was when I went on probably one of my first diets. So I actually ended up slimming down as a teenager, and I got into running, and I actually discovered that I was quite a good runner. So I got back to high school in the beginning of my sophomore year, and when we did have this thing called the beep test. I'm not sure if you know it, but I went from about 6 on the beep test to 11, and his eyes popped out of his head.
Maybe for the listeners, we can explain the beep test. It's like, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's a shuttle run. And so you sort of start off, you've got to run between these two different points, and it speeds up over time. So it's not just how far you can go, it's can you speed up and keep with the rhythm as well. So it's hard. I haven't done one in years, but I remember it being very hard. And he was right. I mean, I was still completely rubbish at basketball, but I discovered this love of running and eating well. And I think I just carried that through my high school, and at university, I studied physical education and nutrition. But I was also, I'm a curious person, and as I think you are, Quadro, and all of our colleagues, like, we really want to just understand more about health, about and about people, I suppose. So I wanted to continue the research path. So I did my master's in childhood obesity, and then I quit my first PhD actually, and then moved up here to Auckland to just do a few different research jobs. And at the time I started consulting because I also have this passion for helping people, and I wanted to see if I could sort of do the two at the same time, simultaneously. Subsequently, though, got an academic job, completed a PhD, and I loved academia, but I didn't feel like it's not really where my skill set lies as much, I guess. I mean, I love teaching, but it was that the whole system thing I didn't really love, being part of the whole academic system. So I have taken my love of sort of research out into my own business, I guess. And so I consult with people, I run fat loss programs, I have my podcast, Mikkipedia, which affords me the opportunity to talk to people like you. And I just, I love it every day, and also have kept up my own interest in health and wellness, and I love running and trying to be strong in the gym and things like that.
Amazing. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the issues around, women's health, bone health, and so on. But it's great to hear that you pivoted, right? Like you went from a position where you were focused on academia, but you listened to your inner voice or that calling of wanting to be more, I guess, almost like more available or more impactful in a different way, like being able to coach one-on-one or in group sessions. And because one thing that you don't realize in academia, many of us don't realize, is our work often is in a very small circle, like very few people, if you think about it, could really have an appreciation of the work we do. So I commend you for branching out, if you will.
Thanks, Quadro. And, academia is, or it used to be, and it actually isn't the case anymore, but when I started, it was a very safe job. You got into academia and people would say, never leave, because it's very difficult to get back in, and you can be here for life. But I sort of realized that, whilst I love teaching, a lot of the students I was teaching weren't necessarily interested in the information that is shared. They're there to get a degree and sort of move on. But also, I also realized that you would see these research studies and they would tell you certain things, particularly about nutrition. So you'd have the mechanistic studies, like mice and rodent sort of studies would tell you how a thing should work. And then you have this quite closed system of a randomized controlled trial. Like if you control everything, then this is what we know about nutrition. But very seldom does that actually then transfer into real life. And I feel like if you're a practitioner, you understand that so much more because you're working with people and you're giving them guidelines that are informed by research. But that's just one pillar of our sort of body of knowledge. And in academia, and you see it actually a lot online, people talk about all these anecdotal, evidence of this stuff and how they almost say it in a way that would render it meaningless because it isn't a study. Whereas I think, how many antidotes does it take to sort of form this body of understanding about how something works? And you'll know it as well. As a practitioner, you'll read a research study and you'll be like, yeah, that might be what they found, but I've worked with like hundreds of people now and that's actually not what we see. So I feel really lucky that I have my research background to have that knowledge when I work with people. And then I'm actually able to help them more, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the lessons ultimately when it comes to looking at research is that you always have to put it into context with the patient in front of you. And this is what a lot of young practitioners or trainees sometimes have to wrap their head around. Is like, yes, this was the data that supports this intervention or this therapy, but the person in front of you, would they have been in that study? As an example, and often people are much more complex, and so I think you do have to embrace the art sometimes more than the science. But yeah, Mikki, I'm curious to hear some of your high level philosophies when it comes to nutrition, because as you know, navigating the nutrition space is challenging. There's so much out there. It's hard to know what's what. But what are some of your general themes or approaches when it comes to nutrition?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm very passionate about protein. I sort of moved, as many people did, into the realm of LCHF diets, probably back maybe in 2010.
Low carb, high fat?
Oh, sorry, yes, low carb.
Just for the folks that are new to it.
Yeah, thank you. And I would so I moved from that traditional model of nutrition, the sort of the My Plate food pyramid style, to more that low carb, high fat, but realized actually after a few years that whilst it suited males tended to do really well on it, women didn't fare as well. And I'm not suggesting that it's not at all a successful approach for some people, but where I felt the missing link was with the protein. And it wasn't like I had this epiphany. Of course, I was following a lot of mentors and it was and because of my interest in the gym and my physical education background, I also had a lot of people I followed that were in that gym rat sort of space, in that physique science space, and they'd always talked about the importance of protein. And so I sort of realized then that actually, if you were to base your nutritional approach around the nutrient which is essential for building the body, much in the way that bodybuilders do, because we are all trying to build a body. And it also had that the benefits of helping regulate blood sugar, which you and I and the listeners know is one of the sort of hallmarks of optimal health, is being able to control blood sugar. Then you're able to control your food intake. You're able to regulate hunger, appetite, and ultimately it's much easier to sort of reach your goals. So I'm certainly a protein centric. I have a protein centric model. But I also love an abundance of vegetables if people can tolerate them. You know, as I said earlier, as a chubby teenager, one thing I always sort of grappled with was having just this voracious appetite. I always felt like I was hungry, needed to fill up. And once I realized that you could do that with protein and that vegetables were a great way to add volume and nutrients, then that's to my mind sort of the foundation of a really great diet. I am, of course, aware, you know, there are dietary approaches such as, you know, the carnivore approach, which from an elimination standpoint is super helpful in certain instances, and there are a lot of people who struggle to tolerate a lot of vegetables. But for people who don't have those challenges, then it makes the diet side of things so much easier. But I'm also about taste. You know, like I have I run fat loss programs and talk to people, and I have this recipe portal that has like over 900 recipes, and I love, a lot of my work is actually in that, modifying recipes to make them more sort of macro friendly, if you like. So more sort of protein centric, lower on the fat and or carbs, and just taste delicious, because you've got to enjoy what you do, I think. You don't have to enjoy, not every meal should be some sort of celebration, you know, but you should sort of be satisfied by the types of food that you eat. So I suppose those are a few things, and also an appropriate carbohydrate load. So I'm certainly not, I would definitely fall in the realm probably of a lower carb approach. You know, even with my endurance athletes that I work with, I mean, there'll be days when, of course, they'll need 250, 300 grams of carbs, but that is, which is, you know, a significant amount of carbs for people who are following a low to moderate approach. But I think most people, particularly in that, with the group that I work with, which is, you know, a lot of women in coming into perimenopause, like, the focus of their diet might be a little bit higher in carbs than what it really should be. So I'm probably more in the realm of 80 to 150 grams of carbs, depending on activity for people, which isn't, I don't know how that sounds actually to your listeners. Depends on whether they come from a low carb or a high fat model. But yeah, that's sort of where I sit.
Honestly, I don't know where our listeners, I think it's all over the place when it comes to the diets, because, you know, we cover a lot on the show, but that's some valuable information, and it's great to hear your pillars on, like, your primary focus being protein. Like, that's my personal bias from hearing the Ted Naimans of the world, and now diet doctors, like, really emphasizing the benefits in terms of like glucose management, feeling fuller, lean muscle mass production, like all these W's when you focus on protein. I'm curious to hear your go-to sources. Like, what are some of the sources that you often refer your patients to or your clients to in terms of where to get their protein?
Yeah, so I love animal protein, actually, Quadri, like because animal protein itself isn't just protein, it's a vehicle for micronutrients. That's where you're going to get your iron and your B12 and your carnitine and your creatine and cholesterol, which we need these things. And particularly over the last few years, there's this narrative that we should all be reducing our intake of animal protein for, the health of the environment, of the animals, and for ourselves. And some of my mentors that I look up to, like Rob Wolf and Diana Rogers, they've done such an amazing job of being able to sort of break that down and be a little bit more objective about it. So I feel really comfortable recommending that people include a lot more animal protein in their diet. And one of the other things which animal protein does do, before I go on to my specific sources, is our brains. And a lot of the people I work with, as they're coming into perimenopause, like they have this heightened anxiety that they never used to have just through changes in hormones. And protein is super calming for the brain, particularly animal protein. So that's sort of where I sit on that side of things. And I love red meat, obviously, for the iron and all the other things which I mentioned, and zinc. Chicken breast, actually, I used to not be a fan, but I love the lean protein sources, because a lot of people that I work with, they're trying to improve their body composition and lean up a little bit. But sometimes the higher fat meat options do tend to be a bit higher in calories. Eggs and egg whites are particularly helpful with regards to boosting protein, but keeping calories, again, within a calorie budget. But I'm also a fan of protein powders. I feel like some people shy away from it because they are, quote unquote, sort of processed, but they're processed in a way that makes them more digestible for us. So I also recommend that people have protein powders. And hey, I'm not against vegetarian diets either. I'm all for optimizing your diet choice, however that looks. And so I would never, and I do work with a number of sort of vegetarian and vegan clients who want to do just that and optimize their protein intake, because it's so much more challenging when you don't include animal protein in. So that's sort of, they'll be my go-tos.
Yeah, no, those are solid. So red meat, chicken breast, eggs, protein powder, any what about in terms of non meat sources? Like what other sources do you like for those? Just, in case, well, I shouldn't say that. There are vegetarians
just in case there's a vegetarian listening.
There's a vegetarian listening to the show. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, I love it.
Canceled here. But what are some of the other sources?
So I love tofu, and tempeh would be my two top options. Edamame beans, so anything in that sort of soy, I suppose, based category. I'm not, and of course your plant-based protein powders as well. To be honest, Quadra, I'm not a big fan of those more sort of meat alternatives, if you like. The new things that are out on the market, the new products. And look, I'm not saying that people should never eat them, because it is actually all about, if I say balance, I don't mean to sound so sort of vanilla when I say that, but you do have, there's no reason why someone can't include a particular, processed product if most of their diet is great. But I'm not someone who would say, go and get yourself an Impossible Burger or and make that the staple sort of protein foundation. A lot of people go to legumes as a source of protein. So your red kidney beans, your chickpeas, your lentils, and they do contain protein, but they're actually a better source of carbohydrate and fiber. So I tend to sort of categorize them like that. But of course they will contribute to protein load. Cottage cheese. I love cottage cheese for people who tolerate dairy. And yogurt. And so the high protein yogurts are also really good. And one other thing I will say is sometimes I like to add an amino acid powder alongside maybe a tofu meal or a tempeh meal for a client who might not get enough of that quality sort of amino acid profile. that they would otherwise have if they were eating meat, because it is all about getting in, a certain dose of certain amino acids like leucine at any one meal that's just going to help maximize and support muscle protein synthesis. So for some people where their appetite is low or potentially their calorie budget is a little bit lower, we'll add in something like an essential amino acid powder alongside that protein source. You don't need it if you have the yogurt or cottage cheese or eggs. But if you're relying on tofu and tempeh, then I think that's something which is should be considered.
Wow. Yeah, that's great, Mikki. Like a nice exhaustive list for people that that are looking to amp up their protein intake. Those are a lot of sources that, whether you are vegetarian or or you do eat meat. And then just to reiterate, in terms of carbohydrate intake for most people, like it sounds like your philosophy is essentially not high carb, but low to moderate for most people. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely fair to say. And I think if someone was counting macronutrients and having a look at sort of meal balance, I would my first recommendation might be, it all depends on their metabolic health, I think, because if you are someone who has pre-diabetes or blood sugar regulation issues, if you have belly fat, or if you are actually just coming into perimenopause and menopause where we start to lose that insulin sensitizing impact of estrogen, then we do need to sort of moderate what goes on with carbohydrate and also choose choices which are also going to sort of contribute nutrients. So my favorite choices would be fruit and potato and sweet potato and legumes for the fiber and nutrients that they would also sort of provide. It's not that you can never eat bread, but these would be my sort of top picks. And then if you were thinking about it from a meal size, I would say, aim for no more than, 30 grams of carbohydrate at any one meal time. So, you might, if you're someone who has 3 meals a day, that might be, 90 to 100 grams of carbs. And also balancing that with protein, because ultimately that's the thing that's going to help sort of control that blood sugar. I guess a caveat to that would, of course, be with athletes. So, people who do that sort of balls to the wall, sort of F45, CrossFit type exercise, they're going to benefit from helping support their recovery with probably a bit more carbohydrate in that post-workout meal. It might be like 40, 50, 60 grams of carbohydrate. And you can get 60 grams of carbohydrate from a cup of cooked rice. It isn't actually a lot of, it's not like you're filling your plate with it. But it's always that sort of that carb appropriate approach, which is a term that my friend Dr. Cliff Harvey, he uses all of the time, and I love it because it's appropriate to your activity level. And I would say the same would apply for your endurance athlete. Like you are afforded more carbohydrate, but you don't necessarily need it as well. Like another one of my good friends is Dr. Dan Plews, and he's got a great course called Enduro IQ, and he's an exercise physiologist, and he's a low carb athlete. His carbohydrate intake would be anywhere from 50 to maybe 150 or 200 grams on a very heavy training day, and he's a guy that does 20 hours a week training, and so there's you can see there's a lot of sort of variation there.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like you can't be cookie cutter with this thing, but I think there is some guide, like a place to start from is where I often phrase it. And before I ask you about menopausal health, what's your recommendation for protein intake, like in terms of quantity?
So
for most folks.
Yeah. So I would say, if you're up to about, say, 40 years of age, then aim for that 30 grams of protein in a meal. But actually, if you listen to, so a 30 grams of protein, for example, you would find in 2 eggs and half a cup of egg whites together. Like one egg has got about 7 grams of protein. Or you would get it in easily get it in about 130 grams of cooked meat. So it's not a lot at any one sitting. But then the other thing to consider is your overall protein intake for the day, which a minimum amount of 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight. However, if fat loss is a goal of yours, you will benefit from being higher than that. And the general recommendation would be about 2 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight, which might work out to be about. But are you kilograms over in Canada? Do you use that? Do you use metric system?
We use both, but I think we mostly use, when people ask you how much you weigh, they'll say pounds.
Okay. So I think if I say 0.8 grams per pound or 1 gram per pound body weight, like I think there's 0.8 to 1 gram per pound body weight is generally a good recommendation. But also, we've got to consider a couple of things. As you get older, your brain requires more of those amino acids to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. And there's no sort of cut-off age with this. The studies that I've seen have used what they term older adults, 55 and above, where they require 40 grams of protein in a meal to get that same muscle protein synthesis response. Also, though, they've used isolated protein sources. So maybe if you're having a mixed meal, you might actually need that higher amount to sort of get that brain response. So these are just some things I think about when I'm thinking about meals for people, like how much protein at any one sort of sitting and how much protein across the course of a day. My other consideration is how much do you need to feel full? If you are like me, who has a good appetite, you're going to benefit from eating more protein rather than less. So that minimum is 1.6, but I'm not afraid to go higher as long as people are still getting their essential sort of fatty acids and they're not missing out on other nutrients. Then I'm not overly concerned if they move a bit higher than that.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's very helpful, Mikki. So you've alluded to this a couple times about the differences you see with perimenopausal and menopausal women. What are some of the changes you see in terms of the general health, and then what nutrition advice do you give to try and mitigate some of those changes?
Yeah, such a great question. And I will preface this by saying, and I know that you've had her on your show, my good friend Lara Bryden is...
y'all are tight? I didn't know y'all were tight.
Yeah, total tight.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And she is, she's been a real mentor for me in this space too. So we're very aligned on a lot of our approach. So hopefully I'll just be confirming a lot of what you guys would have talked about. But so a lot of the changes, one of the biggest things I hear from women is that I'm doing what I used to do to lose weight, but it's not working. So weight loss is certainly one factor, but actually more and more, Quadro, it's almost a secondary issue to the changes in their brain energy that they have, to their levels of anxiety that they have, or this ability to cope the way that they once did. Or their ability to recover from exercise. So a lot of these more things which are associated with probably quality of life, they're experiencing challenges in, and whereas weight loss used to be a main driver as they were younger, but also a lot easier to make progress in, now they're worried much more about these other things which really impact their quality of life. Like they feel like they're actually a different person. Like they can't control what their body's doing. They can't control their emotions as well, and they're forgetting a lot of things. So some of the issues, if I sort of go back to that weight loss thing, what you used to do doesn't work anymore, in part because of the changes that occur in hormones that mean that your ability to respond to stress changes, because it's all a stress on the body. Like as estrogen is fluctuating high and low, it's adding additional inflammation and stress. It's changing your appetite. It's changing how your brain sort of operates. You're less carbohydrate sensitive, which I mentioned earlier, which does impact on blood sugar regulation. So you get a lot more changes in energy as you're trying to figure out that diet side of things. Alcohol, this is another one. Everyone talks about they just can't possibly drink as much alcohol as they used to when they were, in college. Whereas actually even, some women who used to enjoy a couple of glasses of wine now find that they get terrible hangovers from quite a moderate amount, or they feel really low for days afterwards. So these are just some of the challenges I see. And what we know is, one, carbohydrate intake does have to go down if you have a high carbohydrate intake sort of going into perimenopause. And look, a lot of women don't. A lot of women are actually fairly low carb already. Like, we took carbs out of our diet in the 90s. So, that's not the issue. But it's more, they're not protecting, so if they are low carb, they're also, what tends to happen is they tend to be very low calorie because they're trying to do what they always did. They're trying to restrict further because what they used to do wasn't working. And that doesn't bode that well, because they can do it on a Monday and a Tuesday, but come Wednesday, they're just, they're finding their, what they think is willpower, but actually it's their body just going, no more of this, and then they're suddenly, their diet from sort of Thursday to Sunday is a completely different story to what it is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday when they're trying to overly restrict. So if I go back, I'm sorry, I sort of went on, that was another example. But so one, carbohydrate intake, we have to moderate it. Most people need to eat more protein. They think they're eating enough protein when they get 2 eggs in the morning, and they have 100 grams of chicken with their salad at lunch. Then they have like a small amount of meat at night. They're like, I have a high protein diet. What my practical advice, if what I described was your diet, is to double everything that's on your plate when it comes to protein. That's a really good start. I hate to say it, but women often need to cut alcohol almost completely if they're experiencing a lot of the symptoms around perimenopause, like anxiety, like super heavy periods or really painful periods, insomnia. Like, these are real signs to me that alcohol actually should be given a wide berth. And it should, hopefully, once people sort of adopt that approach, I know that they just feel so much better when they take on that challenge. And I say a challenge, I mean, maybe Canada's different from New Zealand, but we've got quite a big drinking culture here in New Zealand, and it's sort of just part of what we do. So that's what can make it a bit more difficult. But there are a number of very good low sugar, no alcohol options out there for people now. But cutting alcohol makes a real difference. Cutting out dairy, actually, or more specifically, A1 protein. So the A1, so milk has a few proteins in it, and there's A1 casein protein, which can, for some people, create more inflammation. And that, combined with sort of higher estrogen levels, can cause a lot of the symptoms that women experience. So moving to an approach which might still contain A2 protein, so that's protein that you find in goat cheese or sheep or things like that tends to minimize or mitigate a lot of those premenstrual symptoms that some women experience. And then looking after gut health is another one, because a lot of the symptoms associated with perimenopause is around that estrogen load. And so if we look after gut health, we're able to get rid of estrogen from our system. If we look after our liver, we're able to get rid of estrogen from our system. So yeah, those are just some of the sort of top things.
Wow. I mean, and to get a sense, Mikki, you do make those changes. With the symptoms, do you find amongst your clients, what's significant? How much of a significant change can they see?
Oh, a world of difference, actually. And it really is quite striking. So when they remove dairy, would be one of the biggest ones. And when they up protein, and of course I didn't, I said double your protein. When they do that, suddenly when you regulate blood sugar, then that helps with your mood, it helps with your anxiety. When you remove the dairy, suddenly those painful cramps and those really tender sore breasts and the back pain and the those things disappear. Heavy periods can disappear. Like it can be light and day actually. And look, I'm not suggesting that for all women they're going to have this most amazing transformation. However, I've heard so many times that of just how much better a woman can feel that I'm sold on that as a sort of almost first line approach.
No, that is, I mean, it's encouraging. Like, it's encouraging that people can take some of the power back. I know some people will fear going on hormone replacement, or there'll be contraindications to going on hormone replacement. But or even if you are on hormone replacement, this could be a way of enhancing your symptoms. So yeah, I think it's wonderful for people to have that information. I'm curious to hear about, you know, your approach to bone health too. Like we were talking beforehand, like it goes hand in hand in terms of, you know, perimenopause and menopausal women and thinking about bone health. But you had a personal experience where you broke your leg, and it sounds like you took a bit of a deep dive into how to address the you know, bone health from a nutrition standpoint. So I'm curious to hear some of your insights.
Yeah, and you know, and you're right, this absolutely goes hand in hand with perimenopause, because of course when I suggest that women take out dairy, one of the first things I think about is, well, what about the calcium for my bones? And whilst absolutely calcium's essential for bone, there are so many other nutrients and lifestyle factors that contribute to bone health, which I didn't fully appreciate until, as you said, I had the incident at the start of the year where I broke my fibula bone, which is one of the bones in the lower part of your leg. And so I really, as an athlete, and just someone who is basically wanting to be independent, it really made me think, you know, what other elements, what am I missing here in terms of what I could do to help heal my bone most efficiently? Like, I certainly didn't speed healing, but what I was fearful of was that I would slow it down by doing things which would be unhelpful. So I'm like, what are the best things that I can do to support my bone health? So initially, if this might be helpful for anyone that is experiencing a bone injury, it's very normal for us, as you know, who are particularly interested in optimizing body composition. Like, once you can't exercise, like I couldn't with my bone, at least for a good couple of weeks, I could not do a whole lot. I could do upper body stuff, but your initial response is to drop your food intake by quite a bit because you're not burning as many calories. And I went from training for 100K ultra marathon to basically having to sit on the couch for most of the day. But your bones need calories. So in that very initial sort of healing process, what studies have found is that your calorie requirement is actually, you know, 1.5, or no, I think it was 1.2 times what you think it is. So and actually, if you people will probably recognize this in themselves, is that when you do break a bone or injure yourself, you do actually lose a little bit of weight initially because your body is under trauma and it is using all of its resources to help heal that sort of trauma. So calorie intake, for anyone counting calories, like, should not drop too low, particularly in that first 3 weeks. After that, of course, it's much more in line with your overall energy expenditure. So calories was one thing. Protein, as you and I have talked about, your bone is 50% protein. If you don't have a good protein intake, then your bones are not going to get the nutrients it requires to help with that bone turnover and help to build and heal that bone. You've also got, vitamin D is an obvious and essential one that I'm sure we're all very familiar with its role in immune system, but also, of course, bone health. And in fact, bone health was the thing that people would always talk about with vitamin D first and foremost. Vitamin K2 would be another one. But then you've also got boron, which is a nutrient which is really essential for bone health, which is one of those sort of anyone thinking, oh, where have I seen boron before? It's just on your sort of your poster of elements, your sort of chemistry poster, like that's where I think about boron. But boron is an essential nutrient for bones. Silica is really important for bones. You find silica in beer, actually, and I'm a bit of a fan of like a tasting paddle of beer. So beer, silica, and Freudian slip, and so I guess what my point is actually more around the nutrients. There are micronutrients you need that you wouldn't even think about. And in fact, I've written an entire blog and did a podcast on all of the things that I took to help with bones. Collagen would be another one. It's the collagen peptides, the glycine and the hydroproline and hydroxyproline and proline. But then moving on beyond that, strength training is so important for bones and for women in perimenopause and menopause. Like, we've sort of come from an aerobics background, and it's certainly better now, but it's often overlooked for sort of taking part in cardio-based exercise. And cardio and doing too much, actually, when you are injured, can break bone down and continue sort of that and delay healing. So, but doing that strength-based training to help build that bone, and it really does. It's got that's that pull of the muscle on bone. When you do heavy weight training, that helps that bone adapt and become stronger. And so, certainly a focus on strength training, even if I'm thinking about the acute injury, even if you're doing heavy weights in the areas that you can. So I could continue to do my heavy upper body weights, but just for general health, for people who haven't got a bone injury, strength training is critical, and I'm certainly a fan of that. That too. And the last thing I will say is, anyone who has gut related issues, who eats foods that they know don't agree with them, yet continues to persist with that, or any sort of inflammatory response, be mindful of that, actually, because inflammation is one of the worst things for bones. So doing anything you can to reduce the inflammatory response in the body is really key. And sleep is huge.
Absolutely. Those are all gold, and especially that last point, sleep. I mean, for all aspects of health, it's an essential pillar that I know a lot of us could do a better job at. Mikki, before we jumped on, you talked about one of your new initiatives on, I think I got this right, Monday Matters?
Yeah. Thank you, Quadro. I over the last couple of years, I've really, fasting has been such a popular nutrition strategy for so many people. And whilst it's super helpful from a weight loss perspective and a metabolic perspective, a lot of people do what I was talking about earlier. Like, they don't do it in a way which optimizes their bone health or their muscle mass, and also they end up sort of, for want of a better term, falling off the wagon after a while, because so they end up in this sort of like fast binge type cycle, or they can. But Mondays Matter, I developed a fat loss program where instead of just straight fasting, it uses protein sparing modified fast days, which is an approach where clinically it is used in people who are very overweight, and it's used for weeks at a time to help them reduce their body weight. And as long as they've got, I believe it's from memory, about 1.2 grams per kilogram of sort of protein a day, ends up being about 600 calories, plus a micronutrient, then they can lose weight very quickly. This is certainly not what we do in Mondays Matter. How we approach it in my fat loss plan is that it's used as a fat loss tool. So on 1 to 3 days a week, people are eating just protein, and it is lean sources of protein, getting maybe 800 calories from 3 different eating opportunities in a day. And then the diet that is planned around that has a lot of those pillars that we discussed earlier: an abundance of vegetables, appropriate carbohydrate, tasty meals, things like that. However, of course, there are caveats. That's a base plan. So if you're active, we always layer on additional nutrition to support activity, which I think is important in a calorie deficit. But, Quadra, a lot of what we've discussed this morning, the plan is sort of based on. So I designed it. It's, I've had a few thousand people through it now, and including males and people of all ages. Yet I do make it dairy free initially, because a lot of people don't know that they've got this intolerance until they actually just take dairy out. So I just, they find it hard to break up with dairy, so I do that for them. And it's this amazing community of people who just are there to help and support each other. Because I think community and that support structure is also really important from fat loss perspective, and it's a weight loss plan. So I do a lot of nutrition coaching in that space, and I love it.
That's amazing. I like that a lot, because I think it's protein based, which we talked about the benefits, but also it's those days aren't horrible, right? Like it's not something, it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the keys to being able to create those healthy habits and success is sustainability. So I like the Monday Matters, Mikki. I think Mikki Monday Matters. Like it works. But
it does. The reason for the name is because regardless of what tier you're on. So I said that you could do 1 to 3 of these days each week, but everyone does it on a Monday, and that's why.
Nice.
Yeah, that's why Mondays matter. I can't remember how I came up with that. I'm sure it wasn't me that thought of it, but it's amazing.
Amazing. Well, Mikki, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Your knowledge is obviously top notch. Learned a ton as always. How do people track you down?
Thank you, Quadro. So people can find me on socials, so on Instagram and Twitter and Threads now, and of which I'm quite active on, at Mikki Williden, so my name. They can also tune into Mikkipedia, my podcast, by that name. It's like Wikipedia, but it's Mikkipedia. Or on Facebook at Mikki Williden Nutrition. But also head to my website, mikkiwilliden.com, where they can see my plans and see what I do. I'm very active I love sharing information, Quadro, and you are the same. That if I can, the more that I sort of am able to share practical tips and things like that, like the more, I feel like I can be of service to people. So that's what my goal is.
Well, you're doing, Mikki, you're changing lives. You're really putting people in a position to avoid seeing someone like myself in the intensive care unit. So you are a hero, and thank you for doing all that you do. And once again, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Quadro. It's been great.